Hey guys, welcome back to The Knife Life. Today I'm here with Chris Slickbald Andre, master leather worker, very well known for his gun belts, sheaths, and just leather carving capabilities and skills overall. So today we're going to be talking about leather knives, what leather knives are, how they're used, and what they actually do. So, without further ado, Chris, could you give us a little bit of a background on how you got into leather work and where you've come from, essentially?
I got into leather work because my mother did it, my father did a little bit of it, and being geographically isolated and an only child, I had needed a lot of things to do. So mom got me into leather really early, and it stuck pretty well. You know, I'm a general all-around craftsman in the shop, welding, machining, all that kind of garbage, but leather's what I do in and out every day. It's what I'm passionate about, and I've had the opportunity to learn from some of the greatest people in my field, as far as learning the techniques, and having taught myself most of what I know. I've taught some, got to teach some things back that others hadn't quite figured out yet.
So when people really think about a knife, they think kind of the Bowie knife or the traditional chef's knife or something along the lines.
Right.
When you're dealing with a leather knife, that's not really what you're looking at.
Right.
So can you actually show us some of the blades that you have?
Sure. We'll start with kind of the main. So this is what's called a head knife. Or there's a similar knife to this called a round knife that's flat across here, doesn't have these little notches. These notches are to put your thumb in so you can drive the knife through the leather. This is a pushing knife. We'd always be wanting to push this knife ahead. We can use the long part. We can tip it forward and get a lot of knife in the leather, and that allows us to keep a straight line, a nice smooth cut. If we need to go around a corner, we rock back on that point and go around our corner and then lay it back down. And that is a traditional looking knife. This is a Gomf knife, no longer made. Plenty of people out there making these knives. We'll get to a few makers here in a second that actually are still making knives, okay? Now this is kind of the racy modern version of that knife, all right? You can see, as opposed to having a perpendicular handle, the handle kind of comes off. For me, this is much easier to use. I've got all the itises, the bursitis, the arthritis, the tendonitis. So I'm always looking for an easier way to make my, to get things done that doesn't hurt. This knife, I like it a lot. I like this little tip up here. I can turn the knife over. I actually plant the knife and move the leather against it if I'm doing small, detailed, curvy work. All right. This knife, you can have made, or you may even have some on the shelf, is made by Leather Wranglers. They're out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. He is the only guy that makes that shape of knife right there. These are made out of a super high-tech surgical stainless steel. I have no idea what it is. It's very fancy. But it does hold an edge very well. This is my everyday knife. I have this knife in my hands many times a day, every day. Okay? We'll get to those crazy knives later. So this is a handy little knife to have. This is basically a made X-Acto number 11 or a scalpel number 11 blade. I use this all the time, trimming threads, getting in little detail stuff. It's just a handy little knife to have on the bench. Okay. Another just kind of basic little utility knife. This is made by a gentleman named Danny Marlin out of Blanket, Texas. Blanket, Texas, about fitting the size of this shop. It's a little big town in Texas, but he makes those in a chicken coop, and they are a mighty fine knife. He makes all the knives, head knives, everything. Look up Danny Marlin. Oh, by the way, that little this little guy was also made by Leather Wranglers, the same people that make my everyday knife. This knife, you can see it kind of looks like a round knife, but it's very shallow and very narrow. This is made, it's called a pattern knife. When we have a big thick piece of leather and we're trying to cut something out that's very detailed, we want to rough it out, cut a big rough, leave a little, half inch around it all the way around. You pick the leather up and you cut from the bottom, and that's what this knife is for. It's made by a gentleman named Terry Nipshield, K-I-N-I-P Shield, Nipshield Knives. This gentleman is an active knife maker. His shop recently burnt down, so he's in kind of recovery mode, and he's got a lot of orders to catch up on, but one of the finest knives you can get is a nip shield knife. Terry also made me this bevel tip knife. This is a very common knife, very common in a shoe shop, as well as a saddle or a holster shop or any other leather shop, really. And it's just a basic utility knife. It's more of a draw knife as opposed to the head knife, which is a push knife. All right. But it's a handy knife to have. Again, I probably use this knife every day. Now the next knives I'm going to show you are specialty knives. I'll show you this one first. This is a combination knife. You see it's got the head knife side over here, and then it's got this little cutoff flat spot. And what that's for is skiving, okay? And what skiving is to thin the edge of our leather. If we want to have a seam there or something like that, we want to thin that edge out, we want to use a skiving knife, all right? This is a non-traditional knife. Kind of a novelty at this point. My good friend that makes these isn't making knives anymore for some reason. I'm hoping he starts back, so I'm going to say Josh Fields anyway. Look him up and pick on him. Maybe he'll make some knives again. All right. This is another very fine detail. It's a little tiny head knife. Very thin. This is for doing very fine skiving work. This is a really handy little knife, again, made by my friend Josh Fields. Call him up and pick on him, because nobody else makes those. Now I'm going to show you a little more of a traditional skiving knife. Now you talk to your Japanese makers. They have a whole other set of knives to do the exact same thing. They look completely different. Nothing wrong with that, just different. All right, this is a knife. It's just a flat piece of steel, you know, hardened tool steel, hollow ground to an incredibly fine edge. This is made by Peter Main. He's an incredible artist down in Houston, Texas, and he makes and sells these knives. They're a fantastic skiving knife, more of a traditional style.
It looks very much like a very standard Japanese kiridashi that they're using for leather work.
Right. The Japanese knives, conversely, the skiving knives are straight across. They don't have the bevel on them, straight across. And they use that knife, they'll hold it up and draw it and cut their leather out instead of using a head knife. Quite a bit different, like I said, than what we do.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much what I've got here. Like I said, there's all kinds of different cutting tools and edgers and push skivers, and you know, there's tons and tons of tools that we have. But knife-wise, that pretty much covers the basis.
Excellent. So what it looks like to me is that you essentially have really two types of knives here. You have the really rounded blades, and then you have the straight-edged blades.
Sure.
And that's really what you're looking at, is a combination of those two.
It's not as much the shape, and the shape's important.
Yeah.
One thing I think that might be very important to note is these knives, and you can see them, there's no bevel line. There's just a little tiny one down there. Just a little tiny, teeny tiny little bevel line down there. These knives are ground at an angle all the way from the hilt down. So it doesn't go down and bevel in like a traditional knife would. This is one continuous bevel all the way out there with just a little tiny refinement on the edge.
So it just slopes in, essentially.
It just slopes into a very, very, very fine edge. Now this will never take a hit. You know, these competition shows, they whack these knives on antlers and stuff. This would never, ever handle that. It's incredibly hard, but it would chip, for sure, just like that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that's what you want, because you need to hold that edge. You know, you're cutting out holsters all day. It needs to hold that edge. So every time you have to go strop, that's money.
Yeah.
You're not cutting leather.
All of these knives, essentially, then, are convex ground. So they slope in like that.
Right.
All of the knives that he's shown us so far are all incredibly thin. What's the thickest on this? It's not even an eighth of an inch thick.
Not even close. This one's the thickest one I've got. Probably it's maybe a 16th. This one here, the old one. Clear back in here. That's less than a 16th.
Yeah.
Right. And it's ground from there all the way down to that just little bit of extra on the edge, and that's just for strength. That little bit of not sharper angle, no, duller angle. God damn it.
It's a little bit of a thicker.
It's a shallower grind. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Right, so it's all the way out to the edge, and then just a little bit of a shallower grind to give it strength. Because otherwise it would be just razor thin, and it would break just going through the cutting board.
Okay.
Yeah.
So make sure that if you're attempting to make one of these knives in the future, which I have unsuccessfully attempted so far, to actually go ahead and apply a convex grind to these, but also make sure that you're using thin enough stock. The one that I used was actually Damascus, and we tried rolling it out and we weren't able to get it thin enough. So it was able to cut leather pretty well, but not to the same precision as what was needed by the leatherworker I was making it for at that time. So it became a very nice showpiece, but unfortunately it's not used in the shop too much. So
these are more surgical instruments as compared to a tactical knife.
Exactly.
Right.
So can you talk us through some of the operations that these knives will be performing? What does each knife really do? What are the operations of actually working with the leather, with the knives?
Well, mostly you're cutting stuff out, you know, or skiving things down, you know, the edges like we discussed. It's pretty dang simple.
So it's pretty much just the
simple.
Gross
you just
operations of
out.
everything.
Yeah.
Is it really involved with the tooling aspect of things? So when you have the murals of your work with the roses and the skulls and everything else in that, are you doing any of the cutting work in that, or is that all stamping and other operations going on there?
So yeah, we do use a knife when we're carving leather, and what I'm gonna show you here is what's called a swivel knife. Okay, the top part swivels, the bottom part stays put. All right. We hold the knife just like so, and we can draw the knife backwards. I can push it forwards and cut. I can go sideways and cut. Wherever I need to go, I can go with that knife. If these knives are the framing hammer, this is the fine millwork kind of tool. This is my bread and butter. This is my moneymaker right here. This particular knife is made, it's a Pro Series knife. Made by my great friend Robert Beard. He is the greatest handmade tool maker in the world, period. Anybody. He makes all my stamps, and well, he makes most of my stamps. We'll get to who makes the rest of my stamps in a second. But this knife is as good as it gets. Now this, from the blade up, is just fancy because I like it, and the super nice bearings. Your finger can't do that. It doesn't need to spin like that, okay? It's just kind of cool. The money in this is the blade. All right, that is 01 tool steel, heat treated in an oven, the whole thing. This guy is a metallurgist, and he makes that knife will hold an edge. I've never sharpened it. I only strop it because he just doesn't need it. Good stuff. Next one down, if you're looking for a swivel knife, I'm going to send you to Barry King Tools in Sheridan, Wyoming. He's not quite as expensive as Bob. He makes a fantastic tool. He makes fantastic stamps. He makes all my edgers, all my push skivers. Barry King Tools, great swivel knife blades and knives.
So what it sounds like is pretty much these knives are the ones that just get your rough shaping to get it. If you're making a knife sheath, for example, it's what you use in order to profile out the sheath.
It's what we use to cut the pattern. If you're thinking about it like, you know, you're making some cloth, a shirt, you're going to build a shirt. You precisely cut out that piece before you stitch it together and all that. It's the same with leather. It's just a thicker, harder material to work with.
And then that swivel knife is the knife that's used to put in the ornate decorations. So in the shirt aspect of things, if you wanted embroidery, that would be what the needle for the handwork, embroidery, and everything.
Right.
Excellent. Cool.
You bet.
So leather is very durable stuff, and one of the tests that knife makers will actually go through with their knives is cutting leather, just to demonstrate that, yeah, this is tough stuff. My knife is sharp enough to cut it and cut it well, and it doesn't wear away the edge really quickly.
Right.
But that's just for a little bit of time that they're working with that. These knives are being run through the leather gauntlet every single day. So, are there any particular precautions or prep work that you make with these knives before you sit down at the bench, or with the leather itself?
Not so much with the leather itself. Certainly with the knives. You can't see it on camera. Behind me over here is a low-speed buffer with a leather strop. wheel and a cloth wheel and a bunch of white rouge, and I'm in front of that thing multiple times a day. I don't let the knife get dull enough to need steel or a stone or whatever, you know. When I do, I've got an 8,000 mesh DMT steel over there that I use. Generally speaking, I don't sharpen my knives.
Yeah.
I buy them. The people that make them
know their trade. Make
them as sharp as they can be. All I have to do is maintain that edge. If ever I get out of shape or something goes awry, my knife makers will retouch them up for me, you know, or whatever. But yeah, is keeping them sharp. You know, if you guys are knife makers or knife handlers at all, you know a dull knife is a dangerous knife.
Exactly.
If you, especially going through leather, you know, you're cutting through an 1/8 inch thick piece of leather or more, and your knife is dull. So you've got all the resistance of the leather. It's a big piece of leather, and you're trying to push it aside with your knife. You're trying to displace that leather with your knife, and it's pushing back on that leather. So you're already fighting that, and now if you're fighting a dull knife, you're going to jump out.
Yeah.
When I was much younger leather maker, not as quite as wise as I am now, I was doing that, and like an idiot, I had a dull knife because I didn't know any better. I was nowhere near a professional, and I was holding this piece of leather in this hand, and I was going at it this way, and it slipped. And the only thing that saved me from burying that thing to my wrist is I turned sideways, and I bounced off that knuckle right across there. There's that scar. And it went all the way to the bone. I had to stitch the tendon back together, the whole thing. And my mentor at the time, I went up to his shop to use a piece of equipment because I had screwed up my hand. I couldn't do what I needed to do. And he says, "Wow, Chris, good thing that knife was dull. You'd have lost that finger." And he's right.
Yeah.
You can go right through your hand with these knives. I mean, just right through your hand. You don't even know it. You don't even feel it until you do.
That's always a funny thing. You cut yourself, you don't feel it until about 3 days later. Or
That's
something
it, because these knives are just that bloody sharp. And again, they're designed to slice flesh.
Flesh, yeah.
You know, the tactical knives, I've got a lot of tactical knives. I've got a pocket knife in my pocket right now that I guarantee I can cut through an 1/8 inch piece of leather like that.
Yeah.
But we know how to handle those knives. We know how to keep them out of our parts.
Yeah.
You know, keeping the hands behind the blade. You know, that kind of game.
Never cut towards yourself.
Well, on a draw knife you can,
well,
but that's a different
like
angle.
cutting towards your hands.
Yeah.
Keep all 5, keep all 10 digits out of the way. Yeah, it might be good if I could actually count.
Yeah.
So, math.
We have computers now.
Exactly. So, essentially, your key to all of this is just meticulous
maintenance.
Sorry, yeah. So your key to this is just meticulous maintenance.
Yes.
Take care of the blades, make sure that they stay sharp, and you won't actually have to go back and do much,
Correct.
or really, in your case, anything in
Correct.
the way of actually redoing the edge.
Yeah. As soon as you can feel it dragging through the fibers. You're cutting through a sponge with a thin layer of skin on top, dermis on top, right? The grain of the leather. And you can feel when it's getting to the point where it needs to be stropped. You can start, you can feel it, the tactile feedback in the knife. You can feel when it needs to be stropped. And and I'm one of those guys, I've started this cut, I'm going to finish this cut. But I don't do that with sharpening, because by the time I finish that cut, it might be too late. Probably not.
Yeah.
But I'd rather go over there and just buff it out a little bit and come back and finish that cut and do it accurately. You know, these knives are sharp enough, and if you've ever tried to cut leather, you'll understand this. I use a ultra-fine Sharpie to trace onto my leather, right? It's essentially leather dye in a pen. Never use ballpoint, by the way. It's oily and it never dries. But anyway, so I do that, and I can pick, just like you're riding a motorcycle in a lane, I can pick, I want to cut the outside of that line, the middle of that line, or the inside of that line. Generally, you want to cut the inside to keep your pattern from stretching with pen offset, right?
Okay.
So you cut right on the inside of that line. And it's a game for me, is how close can I get? How perfect can I cut that thing out? Right? But if you have any kind of a dull knife, you'll be lucky to stay on the line at all.
Yeah.
You can't steer. You can't, you're pushing through mud, right? So yeah, blade maintenance is it. That'll keep you safe, and it'll keep your work clean.
Excellent. So the last question I got for you today on knives is, aside from the quality of the maker and the steel, which is just something that you've provided us with a couple good choices from that, and I'll provide links to the guys that he mentioned down in the description below.
Cool.
Aside from that, what else are you looking for in these blades? What really makes a knife pop out to you and say, I want this particular knife?
Well, I'm an artist, man. If it's pretty,
well,
I want that damn knife, you know. For real, I didn't need this knife. I have a bevel tip knife. It's right over there. I use that one to open boxes. I use this one to cut leather with. I didn't need that knife. It's just a pretty damn knife, and Terry made it. And my friend made that knife. That's why I wanted that knife.
Yeah, there you go.
You know, I can get by with 1-2 knives, maybe. I can skive. There's nothing I can't do with this knife, other than maybe getting some little teeny tiny places like I can with this knife. That is all I need. I can do, other than carving, right? I'm talking about making on the maker's bench.
Yeah.
I can do everything I want with that knife. I can skive with it. I can detail carve, cut with it. Just everything. These are because I want them. At the end of the day, you know, I'm not going to tell people, go out, oh, you got to do leather work, you got to have 32 knives. That's it.
You need one solid good knife, and you accumulate the rest to do the little special tweaks here and there that you like as you go. So.
Yeah. I mean, you'd think I am a sick man. If you want to see my stamp collection, I probably got 700 stamps. You can't even see them so much. I had to give them the block. They wouldn't fit in the desk anymore. It's just, oh, shit, I need that. No, I don't.
So, main thing, get that first knife.
Make it a good one.
Make sure you're getting a good knife so it will last you throughout your entire career.
I'm going to say this. I'm going to look right at you. Do not buy knives from Tandy Leather Company. Don't do it. Don't. They're terrible. They're soft.
So, we'll provide a list of people to obtain blades from in the description down below, like I previously mentioned. Chris, thank you for everything today. It was a pleasure talking to you about these knives. Thank you very much, sir. That's it for today, talking about leather knives. Thanks for tuning in to The Knife Life. As always, if you like this video, please hit that like button. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing and helping expand the channel so I can keep talking with experts like Chris here and bringing you more knives that you want to learn about. Until next time, stay safe and keep living the knife life.